Welcome to our Careers in Peace Building Talk Story series. My name is José Barzola, and I am actually the Conflict and Peace Specialist at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk story today is on the Saigon Sisters, Vietnamese Women Offers Insights into Peace, with author Patricia D. Norland, who also goes by Kit, and so we'll be referring to her by that moving forward, and moderated by myself. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the journey into the profession of peace building. Our event today is co-sponsored by Cornell University Press, the Matsunaga Institute for Peace, and the Conflict and Peace Specialist. Thank you for joining us to learn about this part of history. While 30,000 books have been written about war in Vietnam, fewer are by Vietnamese and fewer still by Vietnamese women. As military historian Thomas Ricks asks, how much longer will American scholars try to understand the Vietnam War while largely disregarding the views of the victors? Which was quoted from a May 30th, 2021 New York Times book review. The Saigon Sisters, Privileged Women in the Resistance, helps fill that void by presenting the views of women who joined the anti-French resistance in the 1940s and fight for an independence to the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. An oral biography, The Saigon Sisters, presents women's stories in their own words. Our special guest today is Patricia D. Norland, who also goes by Kit, who most recently worked as a public diplomacy officer within the U.S. Department of State. She's a translator of Beyond the Horizon and the author of Vietnam and the Children of the World series. Background of the Saigon Sisters and supporting characters in the stories are available at thesaigonsisters.com. I will add that link in the chat, as well as the Cornell link, where you can still get 30% off on the book if you are indeed still interested. But thank you all for being here today. And to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Kit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jose, and thank everybody for joining us on the International Day of Peace. Honestly, I was unaware that on this day each year, the UN Peace Bell is rung at headquarters in New York. And that bell was a gift from the UN Japan Association, and it's rung to remember the human costs of war. So it's quite fitting, I think, to talk about the Saigon Sisters on this day, and to learn about the human costs of war and explore how those insights can be used to avoid repeating terrible tragedies. Thank each and every one of you for sharing World Peace Day with us. I attend a lot of conferences on 20th century Vietnam to better understand the wars there and how we can honor those who died and those who survived. But it pains me, I often come away having heard countless variations on American viewpoints, but few, if any, Vietnamese points of view. I come away thinking I just learned a whole lot more about Americans in the war, but really very little about the Vietnamese. That said, I did hear one distinguished speaker recently who showcases this problem, and that's Chuck Hagel, himself a Vietnam veteran, former senator from Nebraska, a former Secretary of Defense. And I heard him say that, well, he uses a phrase that actually captures very much the essence of what this book talk is going to be about. When he talks about the need to reverse the optics, he said we need to change business as usual. When nations are ignorant of history, the same mistakes are repeated. We didn't listen, he says, regarding Vietnam. We didn't absorb lessons. We need to understand the culture and religion of other countries. And he concluded, history informs, and we need to listen with open minds. And I hope I will convince you tonight that the Saigon Sisters' stories, in their own words, definitely inform. One other veteran that I would just briefly quote before we get into those stories and insights is John Curzano, who was a Vietnam vet and a co-founder of the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation. And he shared a very inspiring review. He says that the sisters' stories tell of a remarkable journey from lives of privilege to lives of hardship, sacrifice, pain, and loss, all in the struggle for freedom and independence. While many Americans are familiar with the Vietnam Memorial Wall in DC and thousands of our stories of loss, sacrifice, and heroism, few know the stories on the other side of the wall, the stories of the Vietnamese. This book, chronicling and bringing to light the lives of these extraordinary women, is both necessary and integral to truly understand America's war in Vietnam. That's very meaningful coming from Vietnam veteran as distinguished as John. By way of introduction to the Saigon Sisters, we're going to take a look at a few photos. Now, who were these women? These were women born in the early 1930s, and they endured decades of war. They were children of the elite who worked in the French colonial administration. And then in 1950, these 9 women who had all attended the prestigious Lycée Marie Curie in downtown Saigon graduated, and they began to join the resistance against the French colonial occupiers. So Jose, let's start with a couple of photos and get oriented here. And that's the book cover from Cornell and Northern Illinois University, both. So this is Lycée Marie Curie. This was taken in 1989 when I first went to interview the women. And this is where they met. Next, Jose. This is a group, actually we have a little glitch here, but this is a group of the women in front of the infirmary at the Lycée Marie Curie. You'll see that the girls, the Vietnamese girls, are dressed in French clothes. Each of the girls was given a French name. They all studied, of course, in French, the curriculum sent directly from the Department of Education in Paris. Indeed, they learned that they are Gauls. Next, Jose. What's amazing about these women, there are many things, is they were studying alongside French girls and some Métis girls, and yet they were often at the top of the prize list. Here is the prize of excellence offered by the Minister of Education of South Vietnam. And the winner is Julie, who is actually Nguyen Binh Thanh, one of the 9 Saigon sisters. And on the tableau of honor are several others of the sisters. Next, please, Jose. These girls spoke French, but finally they were offered as a second foreign language to learn their own language, Vietnamese, and they were taught by Mademoiselle Lan, who introduced them to the beauty of their language and the depth of their literature. Next, please, Jose. In 1950, there was a dramatic event, January 9th, the death of a male student at the equivalent, the counterpart to Lycée Marie Curie, and named Tran Van Eun. And this brought the students out into the streets en masse. And interestingly, even one of the teachers, French teachers at Lycée Marie Curie, joined the girls, one of whom is on the left and 2 are on the right. So they're starting to get very engaged in the anti-French struggle. Next, please. This is one of the women is Lê An, and she is wearing a silk ao dai tunic. She is in front of her family's very large villa in the French section of Saigon. And this next picture, you'll be surprised to see where she is. A few months later, Lê An has traded her silk ao dai, her chauffeur driving her to the lycée, her villa, her French food, and she is wearing black pajamas and leaning up against a coconut tree, and she has joined the resistance. Next, please. These are the 3 siblings within the 9 women, and this is at Tet, and they are about to make a big change as well. Next, please. We see 2 out of the 3 join the Maquis, as the resistance was known, in May 1950. So from January to May, they too have traded their lives of comfort and safety and security to join the resistance and help alleviate what they consider impossibly unfair treatment of their people. Next, please. This is a picture of the French police station in downtown Saigon, on Rue Catinat, which was sort of the Champs-Élysées, or Fifth Avenue of Saigon then, and to some extent still today. And this French police station is where files on girls like the Saigon Sisters and many other students started to be developed, and causing some of them to have to go immediately abroad after graduating. But it's also where they were taken sometimes after demonstrations in the streets. Next, please. One of those who had to be sent abroad because her father was told that the Catina Sûreté had a thick file on her was Swoon, and we'll hear about her later, because she had gone into a 3-month course in the jungle to join the anti-French struggle, but her father did convince her to go abroad, and she ended up going to London and became a brilliant piano teacher. But she's traveling on a French Union of Indochina passport. Thank you. Next. One of the others who is sent abroad is Juan, who wins a Catholic scholarship to Viterbo College in Wisconsin. But her route will bring her back home to Saigon, where she will do her utmost to help her people, including against some practices by the Americans that we'll talk about shortly. Next, please. Another one is Lei An, who joins an artistic troupe that performs and travels with soldiers up and down the country. Next, please. And these are the women when I went to interview them. Some of you are too young to know what a cassette is, but I filled 30 Maxell cassettes with interviews with the Saigon Sisters starting in 1989. Next, please. And very kindly, we spent a lot of time with family members and trying to relax and get to know each other over really good food. Next, please. During some of the interviews, the women would bring little tins with old little black and white photos, and we would look at those together. Here, Lei An is demonstrating what the young girls did when they first went into the resistance and were out working in the manioc fields. They had to wrap a scarf like this way to fight against the broiling sun. Next, please. Here, Shen, one of the other 9, recalls how the students made homemade political leaflets, and we'll hear about that in a little bit as well. Thank you. Next. Liang An is pictured here in front of the high school where she became headmistress from 1977 to 1986. One of the many extraordinary things about these women is not only their courage and compassion for their people, but they actually became very impressive professionals in different areas, including education, like Liang An here. Next, please. The book also contains some very interesting supporting characters. The lady who went to Viterbo, she was sent courtesy of a Belgian Catholic priest named Father Jacques, who was once a very close friend of Ngo Dinh Diem, and who's inscribed this letter, this picture to Father Jacques. The sidebar on Father Jacques is very compelling as he witnesses the tragedy of the downfall of President Diem. Next, please. And what is your connection to this? And just one other example of a supporting character who provides very interesting insights into Vietnamese history is Swoon's husband Lo on the right. And as you can see, the much elderly Mademoiselle Lan, the lady who taught them Vietnamese language and literature, remained a lifelong friend to the women. So I think that's about it for the photos now. Yes, we'll come back to those later. So Stepping back, these stories capture the human cost of war and offer a powerful plea for peace. Their firsthand experiences and later reflections provide insights into the motivations of even privileged women to rebel and help explain why no amount of military power could prevent them from seeking and securing independence. Just a little bit of context, just in case folks aren't familiar. The French first established the colony of Cochin China in 1867. Their rule did not end until 1954 with the military defeat at Dien Bien Phu, after which the Geneva Accords were signed calling for a temporary border and a period of time for people to choose to go to the north or the south of the country, with national elections to be held within 2 years. The government in the south came to be led by Ngo Dinh Diem, the one in the north by Ho Chi Minh. And in 1960, the National Liberation Front was established to galvanize the resistance in the south. And briefly, just for those of you who aren't familiar with it, during America's war in Vietnam, more than 58,000 Americans died, and approximately 2 million Vietnamese civilian and soldiers also died. At the height of our presence there, over 500,000 soldiers were stationed, and it's really hard to capture the scope of trauma and loss during the war. The U.S. did drop twice as many bombs on Vietnam and its nearest and its immediate neighbors as were dropped on Germany in World War II, and there was massive spraying of dioxins, and people are still dying today from those dioxins and unexploded ordnance. So what can we learn from these conflicts? The sisters help us flip the historical narrative that's been so long dominated by Americans, many of whom spent very short periods of time in Vietnam. Let's first hear about the women, just a few examples of in their own words, why they joined the anti-French resistance and what their lives were like. Thuyen is one who says, we were at war against French colonialism. My friend Min invited us to her house to make leaflets marking revolutionary occasions. We mixed chemicals and gelatin, agar made out of water plants, to make a flower pad on which to print slogans with purple ink, as Shen demonstrated in the earlier photo. We sang about the youth and marching for independence. All students did this at every school. At a preset date and time, students coordinated to distribute leaflets all around town. We'd arrange to rendezvous at a certain spot and empty our school bags at the chosen time. Then we ran. We amused ourselves while trembling. You have to remember, these were teenagers. We were not against the French, but against French colonialism. Just one other example of this from Suan, who shares that I didn't want to work for the French. It is one thing to be welcoming and hospitable, to learn French, to be friendly with foreigners. We like foreigners as friends, not as people who subjugate us. I left for the resistance with a few things: black pajamas, a black and white checkered scarf, a pen, and a watch. The first day we traveled by taxi about 100 miles southwest to Mai Tho, a town occupied by the French. I attended a training course for young people and students. There were students from almost every lycée in Saigon. During the day, we performed chores. At night, we attended readings on the resistance and its goal to rid our country of the French. They talked about the current situation and policies so that everybody from every political current and walk of life would know and understand them. They instructed resistance politics and how everyone could use their own ways and means to help the nation. So those are excerpts from the first half of the book, which is called The Cause, the removal of the French. And in the second part, War and Aftermath, we're going to spend a little bit more time how the women joined the struggle to oust the Americans who had followed in the French footsteps. Please recall that the first Marines landed in Da Nang in 1965, and troop numbers would peak at over 500,000 in 1969. So what was life like through the women's eyes during the US intervention in Vietnam? What was it like from the ground up? Tan will give us some insights through her life. She tapped her brilliance with languages, beating the French girls at French language, and became a diplomat. And here are some of her recollections. She said, "It made me happy to participate directly in the liberation of my country as a diplomat. The first time I left the country with a delegation was on a trip to Jakarta to meet a group of 10 women from Women's Strike for Peace, headed by Mary Clark. Now, I don't know, I had to look up Women's Strike for Peace, but it was founded in 1961 as part of the movement to ban nuclear testing and to stop us from going deep into a war in Vietnam. Tan recalls, I accompanied a delegation of 10 women from Vietnam, 5 from the north, 5 from the south. And we at a meeting hosted by the Women's Union of Indonesia, all the women had a chance to discuss. We described our long history of struggle for liberation and the way women have participated in this tradition of struggle. Women's Strike for Peace members appeared sympathetic and said they would campaign to bring US troops home and demonstrate to end the war. To have been a fly on the wall as these women spoke together. Then Tan recalls, among the group, I met a young woman with Students for a Democratic Society who asked, what do the people of South Vietnam think about Ho Chi Minh? Now, Students for a Democratic Society, it was also started in the early 60s to support civil rights and became a leading campus-based anti-war organization. Tan recalls when this young woman asks her what people think of Ho, I was so moved I could not speak. My throat was tight. I cried and could not answer. The Diem government was terrorizing and repressing all patriots, even children. Those who dared voice their patriotism were even executed. So Tan really captures what it's like to do as Secretary Hagel advises us to reverse the optics. She also does this in a very gripping way in describing what it was like to survive US bombing campaigns. As many of you may know, President Johnson authorized a notoriously heavy campaign called Operation Rolling Thunder that continued between March of 1965 and October of 1968. We very rarely hear reverse the optics on being on the receiving side of that. Here's what Tan shares with us. She was stationed in Hanoi as a diplomat at this time. I sent our children to the countryside, where each family in a village took in 2 or 3 students from a class that had to evacuate town. Students wore thickly woven straw helmets and coats for protection from bombs. Peasants stitched and braided the straw tightly to avoid tiny pieces breaking off during explosions and piercing the skin. They knotted long rows of plaited straw tightly together. On Sundays, I bicycled more than 30 kilometers to see my children. I left at 4 in the morning in the dark to avoid the bombing. Reaching the village around 9, I bathed them, cooked, and we ate together. I tried to prepare something different from their strict daily diet. Around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, I rode back and reached Hanoi at 7 or 8. All mothers did this. That's what Sundays were for. I worried constantly about the children attending school in the village. One day I read a big newspaper story about villages destroyed by bombs in the area near where my children lived. I became crazed with grief, knowing there was nothing I could do. Colleagues consoled me. Maybe your children weren't there at the time. Everyone worried they had lost a family member. Then the bombing ceased. Many B-52s had actually been shot down. It was called Dien Bien Phu en l'air, the Dien Bien Phu of the skies. Finally, a cable arrived. No close relatives had been killed. It was a miracle. Everyone breathed. I'm going to move a little bit ahead then to one of her last comments is she was participated in the Paris peace talks, again, as a diplomat. She recalls one of the exchanges at the negotiating table, I can't forget, is the Americans playing their last card, more bombing, and our side responding, "This is how you negotiate?" The Americans could never admit that while their army had a good image after helping the Allies during the defeat of Nazis in World War II, their army played a different role in this war. Now it was the contrary. I'm going to read just one or two more so that we can wrap up with some photos and get some good discussion and Q&A going. But this, I do have to share with you one other from the ground up experience, and that's by Trang. She helps us reverse the optics on what it was like to live as a spy in Saigon while her daughter stays at the family communal home in order to protect her. Talk about human costs. This is a very, very powerful sharing by Trang. I spent 9 months in jail, including the Tet New Year of 1956. As soon as I was released, I planned to resume some resistance activities. But in the meantime, I would try to arrange to stop by the family house for an hour or two to see my daughter, Autumn, until my police tale required more inventive arrangements. Our friend Leanne's villa was right around the corner from our house. I gave Leanne a message with the time she should put Autumn in a pram in front of her house. At that time, I would stroll down Rue Léoncombe and casually stop at the crib. I smiled at my girl and coaxed a return smile from her. I held her pudgy hands and stroked her round cheeks. I slipped a camera out of my handbag and took photos. I saw her like this 5 or 10 minutes on my way to work before walking on. On occasion, it was considered safe enough to have a day-long reunion or even spend the night at the family house. The family called it being a visiting mother. Just one last one from Suwon. So basically, of the 9 women, several are sent abroad by their parents because they're worried for their safety. Several go right in, don those black pajamas and go right into the resistance and stay with the resistance. And a few, for family and other reasons, stay in Saigon but find other ways to support the cause. Swoon is an example who went abroad then and then comes back. She says, after returning from London in 1956, we lived in Saigon as spies. The regime of Diem was trying to consolidate power by launching a bloody campaign in the countryside against former Vietnam fighters, and by conducting a kind of McCarthyite witch hunt in the civil service to find those supposedly supporting the other side. This was the anti-communist movement that culminated in inquisitions and the guillotine, literally stalking the land its length and width to claim the heads of former combatants and to strike fear in the hearts of the people. I cannot bear the suffering of others, Suwon shared. Until the fall of Diem in 1963, we lived under a dictatorial regime whose injustices the people had to bear daily. I felt unhappy, although economically and socially we had nothing to complain about. I shared with my husband the passion, simple but overwhelmingly strong, of the unbearable pity for the suffering of all. After the fall of Diem, the war escalated rung by rung to such proportions as to engulf our whole country in fire and fury. The war was everywhere, in the streets with grenades exploding, on TV and radio. There was so much hatred. We could not stay indifferent. Something had to be done. We answered the call of the resistance. I was wrong. I need to just refer to one other lady's story because this gets further into what it was like to reverse the optics and be in Saigon as the American military presence deepened and widened. Juan completes a master's in social work at the Philippines and returns in 1972. Juan says many of us came to realize just how much the essence of humanitarian aid is like neocolonialism, and concluded there could be no development without liberation. Besides government circles, social welfare activities were the most fertile ground for corruption. Especially fertile were projects related to refugees and child welfare. The number of orphanages grew rapidly, not because the number of orphans increased, but because too much money was available. Thousands of tons of donated food were diverted from refugee camps and reported as stolen in attacks by the Viet Cong, but were actually diverted and then sold for profit. Children and war victims were used and abused during these so-called humanitarian actions. It was really military, this aid was really military and economic support to fight the communists. They used the aid label to authorize the US because US taxpayers were sick of the war. Interestingly, Juan says, I was on the list of people invited to important occasions at the US Embassy. I never went. I was even invited to meet Vice President Nixon and his wife. We always say, French are very nice in France and very colonialist in the colonies. Americans were the same, exactly the same. As soon as they came, they became master of the situation, and I was anti that attitude from the beginning. Working in social work, I was furious at the huge imposed programs to spend American money, though we saw that it was really to back the war. We had some good American friends, but most of them left before the end. They could not bear it. I often say it's thanks to the Americans that socialism developed. I would not have taken sides so definitively if they were not here to push me into the arms of socialism. She gets a little harsh here. The Americans were stupid, inhuman, and childish in how they imposed themselves. I turned my anger to help my country. How can an ant fight with an elephant? Somehow I thought they would lose because they were beside the point. They didn't understand anything about us. So I think this is a good place to stop and just take a look at some wrap-up photos, and then hopefully have a good discussion. I appreciate having been able to share these rare bottom-up, reverse the optics stories and perspectives. And I hope that you may agree that these experiences and observations and insights underscore the need for empathy and to walk even a few steps in the shoes of others. And the character, compassion, and courage of these women can help us do just that. So Jose, if you don't mind, we'll just wrap up with a few photos. My spouse and I went and visited the remaining Saigon Sisters a little less than a year ago. Thank you, Jose. Next. Of course, they're in there. I don't know if you remember from earlier, the Katina, back one sec. The Katina police station, it's okay, is still there, that building on the left. Now there's some massive high rises behind it, but that's where the girls spent some hot afternoons and where their files thickened as the French monitored their anti-French activities. Thank you. Next. One of the remaining Saigon Sisters is Min. She still plays French and other songs on the piano and on the accordion. She lifted this accordion that weighs maybe 40 pounds as though it was a piece of paper, and she's still very vigorous. It's great to see her. Next, please. Juan passed away in 2009, the social worker, but these are some of her former colleagues in social work, as well as students who are carrying on the work of her social work goals, including introducing social work curriculum into universities up and down the country, and encouraging other of the goals that Juan dedicated herself to. Next, please. And one other sister is Thuyen, that we've heard some of her stories. She's still doing well, living with her son and his wife. And indeed, Jose, the last picture, we have to give Thuyen credit for reuniting the Saigon Sisters, because after all that tumult, after graduating in 1950, some of them didn't see each other till after 1975. And it was this little lady riding her motorbike from one house to the other who had the idea that it would be good for them to meet up again. And they had their first post-war reunion in 1983, about 40 years ago. And they were able to overcome so much of the distrust and just not knowing what had happened to each other, and found that they really enjoyed each other's company very much. And so I salute Thuyen and bringing the Saigon Sisters together. And with that, I look forward to comments and questions. And as Jose mentioned at the top, the website, the Saigon Sisters, has a lot more information, including on the supporting characters, Mademoiselle Lan, Lao, the French, Belgian Catholic priest, and so on. So I welcome you to have a look at that as your time allows.
Thank you so much for taking us on that historical journey and just providing those different perspectives, which are ever so important, especially, International Day of Peace. And sometimes folks talk about it as the other side of conflict, or just as we strive for peace, it's so important to understand that we're all coming from different lived experiences, and with that, different perspectives. And as you mentioned, a little bit of compassion, empathy, and kindness can go such a long way. And it definitely shows how you've been able to do that, to be able to nurture this relationship so much further, that the result was these women trusting you to be able to open up about their stories. And so thank you for that. And as well as sharing, why it's important to tell the stories of the Saigon Sisters, and how their stories are so timely today, with everything that's going on in this world. Some questions that I had specifically, and then we'll get to the ones in the chat, definitely. What type of hurdles did you have to overcome in sharing the women accounts?
I would say the main one was gaining trust.
Yeah.
I went in the 80s, which was, the decade after the end of the war, and it was. I think it was really important to show genuine interest in their stories, not sort of transactional. How did you all survive? How did you build these remarkable careers that we don't even have time to talk about? And so I really just tried to express deep interest in how they conducted their lives and what they endured. And it was hard because culturally, I think the women in Asia and many parts of the world still, it's hard to talk about themselves. And one of the sisters actually said to me, a lot of my friends died, and I feel like what little I could do was, I'm happy I was able to do it, but it was hard. It was hard to gain that trust, but just through showing authentic interest and respect without judging, just wanting to know what it was and feeling it's important to reverse the optics. And then just spending time, we got to know and enjoy each other's company a little bit. That helped to open up things. Honestly, one of the first times I would ask, well, what was it like to endure the bombings? There would be a really short answer. Oh, it was very hard. It was very scary. So it just took time over time. Oh, well, where were the children? How did you get out to see them? And so bit by bit, you just pulled out some of the vivid details that I think bring their remarkable lives to life.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in on some of these questions from the audience, just being respectful of that, and then I can jump back to some of the ones that I had. But uh, Tony has a comment about definitely a wonderful book. I could only read a small chunk and then take a break. So much sacrifice and loss. But the question is that they're wondering is, what do you think about Burns and Novick's The Vietnam War, where especially where it might try to reverse the optics?
Oh, the Ken Burns series? Yes, I think it was a rare departure and an overdue one to have some actual Vietnamese people from various sides share their individuals' perspectives. And I'm actually extremely grateful to Ken Burns because he provided a very gracious and meaningful commentary on my book. And I'm super grateful to that. And I think that we need more delving into perspectives like he brought to life. I'm a big fan of that. I know it wasn't perfect. I know that there are some people who see gaps, including on enough attention to the anti-war movement. But having just finished, one of the hardest things about writing a book is what you don't put in it. So maybe I'm a little bit more empathetic to Burns that he couldn't include everything. But I think he did a remarkable job to sort of mainstream a whole different perspective and deepen really try to get mutual understanding. So I'm a big fan. Thank you for asking, Tony. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Tracy today has given that these women were the elite class, how are they viewed slash accepted by the non-elite resistance fighters?
That's a very interesting question. That and also how were they received after 1975? And there's quite a bit about that in the second part of the book. But within the resistance itself, when they were teenagers, it's most of them had found that the peasants that they worked with, and in some cases where they were teaching peasants who were illiterate, and they built up a lot of trust and appreciation, and they felt they worked very closely together, which is, I think, a great commentary on everybody, on the Saigon Sisters who left that life of privilege, but they really cared about their people. I mean, that's the overarching thing, is even at 15, 16, their sense of compassion for the suffering of their people is so strong. And I guess maybe it was very much appreciated by people in the peasantry. Again, after 75, it's a bit problematic. As Juan said, she had 3 strikes against her. She had gone to the United States to study. She was Catholic, and her family worked very closely with the Americans, including one of her brothers was a translator for General Westmoreland. But somehow, and she had some very harsh words, but her love of her people, she was able to overcome those strikes against her and try and do the best she could for her people through social work.
Thank you. Helen asks, you mentioned the files the French kept on the sisters. Did the Americans also keep files, and do the files, French or American, still exist?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Oh gosh. I don't know, but boy, I'm gonna have to find out. I think that's fascinating. Um, the French, I need to find out where those Sûreté Générale files are, and it would be very, very interesting to know. Thank you, Helen. That's a great question and something I need to get into. Really interesting question.
Alex asks, says, Nha Mihi, thank you for sharing these perspectives. So important to hear the Vietnamese experience, and from women too. You have done well to highlight their contributions. How did you manage the emotions which would have come with these?
Well, I appreciate that question and Tony's point. It was like that when I was interviewing them. It so sometimes once we had established some trust and they were opening up more and giving more extensive answers and more personal answers. I remember coming back to the room I rented it for my landlady and just being, yeah, absolutely exhausted. And it's I guess the overriding thing that overrides all that emotional tearing at your heart is feeling that these stories need to be told, that we can honor them and people like them. And as I said at the top of our talk, everybody involved in the terrible tragedies of the 20th century wars in Vietnam, we can honor them by deepening our understanding and hearing more voices, and trying to do our best to avoid people having to go through that kind of suffering that they did.
Terry
Nobody should
asks,
have to.
Terry asks, Kit, what would you like Americans and the U.S. diplomats to learn from your book and the stories of the Saigon Sisters?
Well, that is so interesting. I appreciate that. I recently came across a quote that I really liked that pertains to just this. And it is a review of the book. A reviewer said the author has elicited true stories from people least likely to be considered worthy of attention, Vietnamese women. Although American policymaking during the war years is not the main focus of the women's stories, one is left wondering whether the entire bloody American enterprise in Vietnam might have been avoided had U.S. policymakers shown the empathy and compassion for the Vietnamese people that is demonstrated here. So, you know, I do think we have, I think we have a problem reversing optics, as Secretary Hagel and John Terzano and others have commented all along the way. And I also really appreciated a reaction to the book from somebody who spent her whole career in international education and said, you know, basically, where have these stories been and why can't we have more? Who's going to write the Kabul sisters? Who's going to write the Baghdad sisters? Who's going to write the Havana sisters? There's a real dearth of compelling stories that make us concentrate on the different perspectives. I would really love it if diplomats did some more, maybe took some courses at the Matsunaga Institute of Peace or Eastern Mennonite University or other universities that really focus on conflict management and the importance of listening to others in a respectful way that does not suggest that Western American civilization is the end all and be all and end all, but so less hubris, more attention to the other perspectives.
Thank you so much. One of the questions also that came to me, we talked about trust a little. Do you have any words of wisdom or tips on how to build trust, especially being someone who is not Vietnamese, who is not of the religion, like, you know, I just wondering if you talked about all these other sister books that could be potentially explored, and for other peace builders out there that are looking, you know, if you have any guidance.
On building trust.
Or what worked for you, I guess.
Right. I think one thing we had going for us, this particular group, since they had gone to Lycée Marie Curie, they had been to, as one of them described it, a international multidimensional way of studying. And we did have a little leg up by both their European formation and language, and I'm also something of a francophone, though not a fan of the colonial or neo-colonial aspects. But I think we were able to bridge a little bit just by virtue of them having been at the lycée, and some of them having traveled, like Juan to the US and Suan to London. But basically it really just comes back to authentic, genuine interest and convincing them that I really respect their lives, whatever, and that they're really important to share. And I just feel very lucky that we were able to bridge as much as we did.
Thank you. And it sounds like, finding those opportunities to connect, those shared experiences is what I'm hearing. And a lot of it is through dialogue and communication. So thank you for your patience in this process. Now, I know that you participated in lots of programs, for the book and with audiences in the US and Vietnam. How have the reactions and reviews of the book surprised you?
I've just been so heartened by the responses to this book. I I've been able to give, I regret, of course, I'd love to be in Hawaii right now with all of you in person. But one upside to the book coming out during Zoom was we were able to have quite a range of gatherings, including in Vietnam with for example, the Fulbright University of Vietnam. And I remember there were about 40 or 45 young people and a lot of women. And it was very, very interesting that many of them had no idea about the role that Vietnamese women had played in their country's liberation. And I found that back here in Northern Virginia as well, meeting in homes with Vietnamese Americans from 25-year-old to 85-year-olds, and a surprising number of people who just really didn't know about stories like this. So that's been very heartening, the range of ages, and then the I think one of the most satisfying responses was by a Vietnamese American woman here who said, it's part of our history. Later generations should be aware. Some think only men should be the heroes of the resistance and the war. This book offers a chance to hear what these women had to contribute. So that's been extremely heartening. And I also have done a couple of book clubs, and I so appreciate people being interested. And one of the women in a book club had a fascinating question, and she asked, had I thought about what I would do if I was in the position of the Saigon Sisters in 1950, and I'm graduating, and I live in this prestigious villa, and I went to this great school, and I have a French name, and I speak beautiful French. What would I have done? And further, if I had chosen as they did, which one would I be? And that's a really interesting question. And it gets to one of the beautiful things about these stories, which is the way that women put others ahead of themselves, and are not satisfied with just being comfortable and being chauffeured around and having a lot of money. So I think that's a really remarkable aspect of this. And again, I think another reason it's timely now, because there's so many issues, as you alluded to, whether it's COVID or climate change, where we should probably all try and adopt a little bit more of the empathy and compassion outlook that so many of these women did.
Thank you. So having yourself traveled so much, not only as growing up with your parents' career and then your own, um, how do, how do you identify as what is home?
I would say a peripatetic life, like I have lived, daughter of diplomats and then a diplomat, has really made me very dedicated to my relationships with my spouse, with my siblings, my wonderful sisters-in-law, my fantastic nieces and nephews. I was lucky that my parents, we were back in the Washington area here during some formative middle and high school years. So I have some wonderful friends that I've been able to keep through 50 years, which is a blessing. I'm so blessed to have an aunt and uncle, two uncles and an aunt still with. So I identify home. I'm happy being as close to those important people, and otherwise travel to those that aren't nearby. But it's about, I think when you travel that much, your nuclear family is paramount, and then by extension, when your parents who are pictured here are not with you anymore, you're just so grateful for the family and friends that you have.
Thank you so much. In case the audience is wondering, so Nhà Nha means let's go home, and it's a little bit of a side project that I've been working on, along collaborating with Fulbright University in Vietnam and then the United States Institute of Peace, on a community-created album that explores the relationship between photographs, memories, and home within the Vietnamese communities. And that's could be someone from Vietnam, the diaspora, or I would consider you part of the Vietnamese community. You've had 30 years of going back and forth and getting immersed in these stories and the community. So if anyone in the audience wants to learn further about it, it's www.nha-nha.com, and then I'll put some links in the chat as well, and you can learn more about it. If you consider yourself part of the Vietnamese community, please contribute. It's an ongoing project that's, I think, receiving, it just launches today, and then it's going all the way till December 21st. Myself being an immigrant, I have had lots of places that are home. So I completely agree. It's where your loved ones are. That's really what it kind of comes down to. It's not necessarily a physical location so much. But having gone on this almost 30-year journey of collecting stories to put this book together, I can only imagine how exhausting mentally and physically it must have been. How did you take care of yourself? I always love asking about self-care. It's so important, I think.
Well, of course, those relationships are so important. You never feel like you're alone, and you're buoyed up by wonderful family and friends. I'm also a big fan of the role of Mother Nature. The more time we can spend outdoors. I mean, how many shades of green are there? It's so amazing to walk in the temple of green of the park. And I think also going to the ocean or the mountains, the perspective that gives you, so that you get out of your own head spinning a little bit too much and just feel a part of something really big and beautiful. It's really, really very therapeutic. And poetry can be very powerful. I have a favorite, Mary Oliver, who combines, she has a great phrase, which I try to live by. She says, pay attention, be amazed, and tell about it. And a lot of her poetry is about nature, so it's very soothing and gives a lot of solace. So we also happen to have a very, very athletic dog. So now the last 5 years or so, 5 or so years, we have to take those daily walks in nature, and it's all for the better. But that's always been a go-to. There's something about walk. I am literally a tree hugger. I sometimes will walk by a tree and just want to embrace it. And I just think it's important to remember that we are a part of nature, and I think that gives a lot of solace.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Just wondering if you have any last words of wisdom for other folks who may be on a similar journey as writers. I know you kind of give them some tips on building trust. Just wondering if you have any last words.
Yeah, well, one is a word I apply a lot to the Saigon Sisters, which is persevere, because I'm one of those people who has the drawer full of rejections from publishers. And I mean, it sounds so hallmarky, but you just have to believe in what you're doing is important, and just let those rejections flow away. Don't take them personally. It's a long struggle sometimes to find the right fit, and then once you do find a publisher, I had a tough time realizing that one of the readers of the manuscript came back with about 150 suggestions, which would have completely altered the approach of the book, which is to give the historic scaffolding to the women's stories and then let them say their piece in their own words. And this academic suggested, oh no, do this or this. And I had to, here I finally thought I found my publishing partner, and I had to say, no, I can't do that. These women, their own words have to be a paramount part of this. So it's a lot of perseverance and just keep the fire in the belly. And I mean, I remember the aha moment when I realized these women were something that had incredible stories to tell, as if it happened yesterday, and it happened in 1989. So stick with it and don't take things personally, and do let your friends and family have some input, but say no if somebody gives advice that just, you know, it's not what you are dedicating yourself to from the get-go. So yeah.
Thank you for that, and just staying so honest and humble and true to yourself and the vision that you had from the beginning. I know it can be challenging, as we say, to lean into discomfort and have those difficult conversations, but thank you for persevering, and thank you, Kit, for allowing us to learn so much about, you know, your work, your passion project, the wealth of knowledge that has guided you and hopefully can guide other future, you know, peace related projects. And I look forward to seeing those other sister books coming out. I wouldn't be surprised. I hope we planted a seed out there. I truly appreciate you opening about your experiences, the lessons learned, and tips that have come out of today's dialogue. Tips that I know will be very useful for future peace builders. Thank you for your kindness, your leadership in this field. When we talk about careers in peace building, I like to, part of it is educating folks that they too can do this work in so many different facets of their field. From, you know, everyone's building relationships left and right, and so that's the beginning right there. And what it evolves to is quite a journey, and yours has been an amazing one. And I look forward to continuing to stay in contact and seeing where it further develops. But last but not least, I do want to thank everyone who joined today's event. So greatly appreciate your interest in supporting, joining us to learn about the journey to profession.